So, guys, we have all the panel and listeners are joining in. So I'll get started because it's a 20-minute conversation, right? Um, the last few times, right, we've been discussing around how to kind of get your startup funded, right? And we have had some lovely conversations over the last 2 weeks and over the last 10 weeks, obviously, around everything to do with a startup and the startup cliff, right? Which we as folks who are experienced in work but not in startups kind of experience when we begin something new, right? So this week, I wanted to, kind of talk about a little bit around how do you value a company, right? So when you are going to an angel investor or when you are kind of pitching your product or your service for funding to a VC, right? How do you go about valuing your company, especially if it is pre-money? So there is no money, there is no EBITDAs and all of those formulas that one can use. What are the best ways to, determine a number for yourself? Because that gets asked quite often, right? Saying, so how do you value a company and how much are you willing to dilute for the funds you need, right? So there are obviously some standard methods available if one searches online, and there are all kind of maths and all. But I thought it would be great to have all of your perspective on this in this episode. Make sense, Utpal? You want to kick off this conversation?
Absolutely, Anurag. Absolutely. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay, guys. Thank you very much for joining in. On this, Anurag, the biggest truth of this stage is that your valuation is still only an opinion, and
Mhm.
therefore it varies widely from individual to individual, and also depends a lot on which side of the table you're on. But remember, at the end of the day, at a pre-revenue stage, it is an opinion. And there is no science, no maths, no Excel sheet, no future.
I think rightly so. It's just there is no science behind it. Honestly, it's all really an art, but it's really more perception driven and opinion driven. Valuing a company at a very very early stage has really no metrics behind it. We love to do, and I'm an investment banker, an investor, and we love to do all kinds of math and pull as many numbers as we possibly can to sound intelligent. But honestly, it's really driven more by gut and more than anything else, what percentage of the pie you really want going in. Typically, an early stage investor is always looking to get, a fairly substantial stake in the business, which gives him or her a few things. One is the rights that they want in order to be involved in and have the ability to influence very significant and major decisions in the company. The second is to have enough stake and skin in the game for the risk that the investor is taking at that very, very early stage, right? And when you're coming in at a seed Series A round, there's still a fair amount of risk on how this is going to pan out, and there is still risk in terms of go-to-market strategy, in terms of product, in terms of how big the market is, etc. So to be adequately compensated, they're again looking at those higher returns. And then lastly, investors continue to get diluted. Most companies today, especially high growth ones, continue to raise capitals in multiple rounds, as we've seen in the press, which means that the investor needs to have the appetite to continue to invest in future rounds. But if they're unable to do so, they need to make sure that they have enough in terms of a stake that keeps them on the board or gives them the rights that they need for a fairly long period of time. But that being said, I think the valuation is just a number. It's most founders, at least in my personal opinion, I've seen get very hung up and very focused on valuation. While that is an important metric, what's more important is really the marriage you're getting into. And I've told Utpal this many times. It's like you're really entering into a marriage with a defined timeline. There is a divorce you're agreeing to upfront, right? So you want to make sure you're in it for the ride with the person that you want to be in the ride with, because having the wrong investor at an early stage is extremely disastrous. You want to have one where your visions are aligned, where you have an investor who understands the nuances of this business and appreciates the ups and downs that you're going to go through over a 5-year journey, but also one who has your back when you need it. Maybe I'll just pause there. Utpal, over to you for thoughts, questions, etc.
Thank you, Richa. We'll circle back to you. In the meanwhile, if Dinesh, Sanket, and Nil, if you guys would like to add to this, please.
Utpal, thanks. I think I completely agree with what you said that valuation is just an opinion, and also what Richa said, right? It's an art. There, just on a lighter note, Richa said that this is like a marriage with a defined timeline. But there was some study which said that VC investments tend to last longer than most marriages in quite a few places. So that's a new dimension to this there. But just getting on to this, right? I think at this stage, right, at an early stage, it's actually just, and if you were to put it like a mathematical equation, it is how keen is an investor to invest and how desperate is the entrepreneur to get the capital. I mean, it is just the interplay between these two things, right? And if you were to sort of look at how do you go about playing this equation, it is how do you increase the keenness of the investor to invest, right? Be it basically the fear of missing out or anything else that you can put into this whole exercise. And how do you make sure that you're really not desperate for cash there? I think these are the two equations that you really need to balance, two parts of the equation to balance to sort of actually be able to raise capital. I think as Anurag had mentioned initially, there are a lot of methods to do a value, which is in, and I think there are enough sources on the internet to actually get that there. But reality is essentially one, you need to, it is more about a negotiating exercise rather than anything else. So let me leave it over here and then come back later on. Thanks.
Thank you, Dinesh. This equation of keenness versus desperation is something that we see play out in deal by deal. Uh, Thank you. Sanket, Indranil, your thoughts, please.
Sure. So this is the Indranil. Again, I think there are, experienced people in this panel. I'm not a valuation expert, but I am, creating something on my own right now, and I'm in the process of, trying to figure out the valuation of the idea rather than the company, because we are developing assets, animated assets, right? So one of the questions I wanted to kind of ask is that, when somebody's developing something new, uh, is it beyond the revenue? Obviously, revenue I think becomes a major factor, because is there any kind of traction at all from the market? And the fact that, what is the addressable market that you're going into? What is the overall size of the market? Is there a probable customer base? And what might be the ramp up plan in terms of customer acquisition? Beyond these three, are there anything else that early stage investors look for?
Uh, Well, I think Richa is an expert on this one, and maybe Sanket wants to come into. But my experience has been that the idea that you put out, in addition to all these words of TAM and etc. etc. I think today, what is the experience and the execution capacity of the team behind the idea? What is the validity of the words that you are putting across on the table? And what is the confidence of the proposed investor on your ability to execute what you're saying you can? I think that has become really very important in these times. Richa, Sanket?
I'm happy to go first. I think, Indranil, good questions. As Utpal said, at very early stages, we are really backing the team, the founding team that has come together. And what you're really assessing is, does this team have the capability to build out the product, services, the vision that you're really talking about, either from past experiences or the commitments that they have, and the nuances they've understood of this business. TAM is something you'll hear constantly. How big is this market opportunity? But for a VC investment, you're looking to make several multiples of what you've invested, right? And so you want to make sure the market size is big enough. Are you really a me too, or is this something unique and new? It's important to differentiate yourself from the crowd that's out there and to be able to clearly articulate that. But honestly, more than all of this and product market fit and all of that is really how you sell your story. I think it's really important that you're able to convince an investor very early on in the first few minutes that you have a product, you have a team, you have a market, and you have a strategy to execute on that.
Yep. There's a question from Mahesh, and anybody could take this. It says that is it better to go to the VC route or the debt route while raising initial capital? Anyone would like to take a stab at it?
I can go on that and just give you my opinion if that works here. So I think if you're trying to do something risky, and if it is basically unproven, untested, and the general rule is if it is the riskier the raise, and early stage investments typically are risky investments, they are much better funded by equity. Debt preferably comes in place where there is some level of certainty, and debt is more focused on cash flows and the business generating cash to actually be able to cater to the requirements of capital raise. I think debt at initial stages doesn't seem to be a good idea.
If I can just add to that, Utpal, I think that's absolutely bang on. The one aspect I think several founders don't think through is that not all businesses are, require or need equity investments. There are certain businesses that actually absolutely don't and can be bootstrapped and run in that manner. So I don't think debt and equity, external equity, are the only two options on the table. One really needs to think through what's really needed for that specific business model.
Yep. Sanket, would you like to add your thoughts on this? On the entire, issues that we've discussed, and anything else you wanted to add?
So I'm a first time founder myself. So yeah, I mean, lot of things that have been discussed answer a lot of my curiosities. And one question that I had in mind was, so once, we know that now that I know that all the variables that can impact the final translation of a company into its valuation are like traction and your strategy and how fast have you been executing things as so far and all of those things that can increase the conviction. But what is the right timing for one to think of finances? Or keeping it bootstrapped is good, but yeah, scaling the things in a market that you see to be hotly contested, what would be the right timing?
Every time you will have to be, if you're the founder, you will have to be in the market for raising funds all the time. It is never over, never ever over. Richa?
Totally agree. Your job as a founder ultimately is really that of constantly raising capital and being a salesman at the same time. So,
Yeah. One very, one advice from a very well-respected senior that I got was one big thing that the investor is looking in the founder is the founder coachable? And that was a tricky one for me because how does the founder present herself or himself? As somebody who's willing to be influenced by external ideas or somebody who has the conviction in her or his own idea to take it forward? Richa, you would have seen so many of these discussions on the other side of the table.
yeah, I think coachability is important, Utpal. So I think investors look at it from two perspectives. One is the person moldable in the sense that if you're coming in as a very early stage investor, are they open to ideas, are they open to suggestions, or extremely adamant that their way is the right way? Sometimes founders like the very headstrong and strong-willed entrepreneurs because it's important to have that conviction to push through, but it's also important to recognize where you have those pitfalls and where you don't necessarily understand nuances and you're open to ideas. So it's sort of a combination of the two that becomes important. But at a very early stage, your business will go through several pivots and turns and twists. And your ability to navigate through that is what's extremely crucial.
Fantastic. That is one point that I think is poorly understood amongst the founder community. What about the impact of the team that you bring in on the evaluation? how important is the existing, or is it okay if you can create the team as you go along, because you're raising funds at the initial stage means you don't have too much of money, and if you don't have too much of money, how do you bring in a senior big competent team?
I think, Utpal, the team is really important and critical. The founding team is, right? So whether it's you as a sole founder, and if that's the case, you got to have sort of an idea of that army of people that you're going to hire around you, or if it's a team of multiple co-founders, do you bring those complementary skills, and have you worked together in the past that there are those synergies? No investor expects you to have your full senior team sort of rounded up on day one, given the stage you're coming at. So it's important that you're able to bring in enough sort of meat, if I may say so, early enough into the game, but also identify where those gaps are and be open to making those hires in the future.
Fantastic. Dinesh, any closing comments? We have 30 seconds to go.
No, absolutely. I think there's just the point that was made before, right, on coachability, right? I just wanted to sort of bring in that I think it's a balance. People want you to have conviction, but meanwhile also be open to ideas, right? It is in some ways contradictory. But the thought that I want to leave is, for example, value addition and interference are actually just two sides of the same coin. So similarly, having conviction and being open to ideas is actually pretty much it's not mutually exclusive.